Hi, Minoli. Welcome to Shiko.
Hi, Shreya. Thanks for having me.
And Minoli, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in your own words.
All right. So I'm Minoli. As Shreya said, I run a communications agency called the Mini Project. I have been doing this. I have been an entrepreneur for close to 6 years now, and it's been a crazy ride, crazy fun ride. I've been in the communications space for close to 20, I think over 20 years now, and it's been really insightful. And I'm really excited to share my thoughts with you today.
So, Minoli, you've built a career at the intersection of women's health and social impact. Two areas, while they're deeply connected, don't always get the spotlight they deserve. I'm curious, what first drew you into this space?
Yeah, very interesting. And let me try to summarize all my thoughts. So, social impact is at the heart of most of the projects I work on nowadays. But I've always believed that women's health and well being are foundational to thriving societies. And this is a kind of thought process I've had for a long time. I was always interested in this space, but my interest really deepened during the 7 years that I spent at a parent focused startup, the Parenting. Now, it was the Asian parent back then, but now it's called the Parenting. Um, at that at that job, while I was working there, I saw firsthand how the issues women face differ vastly from one country to another, even in the same region. And I realized the importance of creating culturally targeted content that resonates with their unique experiences. And by crafting this content that truly connects with moms, so our audience back then were moms, mostly moms, whether it was about parenting challenges, health, kind of daily struggles, I understood how impactful communication should and could be. So we truly wanted to help women feel seen, heard, and supported and cared about. And I mean, yes, the clicks and driving clicks and users and all those data did matter because it was a very fast growing startup, but we really wanted to create impact. And that experience not only sharpened my skills in understanding diverse perspectives, but also underscored how addressing women's needs could create a ripple effect of empowerment, nurturing healthier families and stronger communities as a result.
Psychology safety, like psychological safety, is
Mm,
something that we don't even talk about, like for women specifically, right? So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
amazing how you were able to do that through the medium of your startup. Now,
Mm.
Minoli, when you think back to the early part of your journey, was there a moment that made you feel, yes, this is where I'm meant to be? Something that made the work feel especially meaningful?
Yeah, I think I had many moments throughout my career, even before I started working on this mom market. But in the beginning, for me, it has always been those real human stories that truly moved me. So during my time at Parenting, I had the privilege of interviewing moms and writing their stories. And some of these stories were deeply harrowing stories of child loss, resilience, and unimaginable challenges. Those conversations taught me the importance of writing with empathy and impact without sensationalizing real experiences, which is something we see far too often today. Um, what also gave me the purpose was helping these women find their own voices. So I set up the company's influencer marketing arm and worked closely with small and nano influencers. So these were real moms who wanted to share meaningful stories with their communities, supporting them as they built their platform. And we told their truth, and they wanted to tell their truth. That was a really incredibly fulfilling process for me. So through this whole process, I was really able to understand how storytelling, when done authentically, could not only empower people but also create ripples of positive change for their own families and communities. And that's where I found meaning in my work by amplifying voices that deserve to be heard.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Minoli. And I remember the last time when we had a conversation, you mentioned that every enterprise in some way is a social enterprise. And that was a very powerful statement that sort of stuck with me. Can you unpack that for us? Like, what does it look like in action?
Yeah. Oh my God, I have so much to share on this. So I believe, yes, I believe that every enterprise has the power and responsibility to do good beyond making money. And it must wield that power wisely. Nowadays, there are things like greenwashing, woke washing. We hear these all the time. They have become more prevalent, and it's even more critical than ever for businesses to ensure their actions align with their values. So consumers are definitely more discerning now, and they can definitely see through superficial campaigns and contrived promises. So, what they seek and reward are companies that are genuinely purposeful and transparent about their why, the why, like why they exist. So when businesses communicate why they do what they do, they connect with their audience on a deeper, more meaningful level. And this approach extends beyond merely marketing your product or service and focuses on building trust, boosting loyalty, and creating a community of advocates who share your values. So, if I were to add a little bit more to this, purpose driven companies are also held to higher standards. And this I've seen working with these companies, which is a good thing because it promotes accountability. It ensures that their actions are aligned with their mission, whether it's sustainability, inclusion, or social impact. And they are constantly working towards tangible outcomes. So, you asked what this looks like in action. In action, to me, this looks like embedding purpose into every layer of the business, from product design to supply chains to marketing. It could be employee engagement. For example, it could mean reducing environmental impact, creating opportunities for underserved communities, or advocating for systemic change. We're not talking about checking a box here, and there are too many companies doing that. And it's getting harder to actually just check that box and move on. So these principles need to become a core part of the company's DNA. And in this day and age, businesses can no longer afford to ignore the social and environmental challenges around them. And I do firmly believe that doing good is also good for business.
That's fascinating because it also shifts the responsibility, right? Like suddenly it's not just NGOs or not profits that are doing good, but
Oh, yeah.
every single organization is held accountable to do good.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've also had to take complex and often sensitive health and social topics, make them resonate with people in a way that feels real, not just the corporate speak, as you said, right? What does that process look like for you, Minoli?
Okay, I think there is a very strategic, as a content creator and a communicator, there's a very strategic approach that I take for this. And for me, the process begins by genuinely addressing and answering the audience's questions. So you could take the most complex of topics and simplify it by answering the questions the audience has, right? So I'll just try to simplify the process from a content creator's perspective. So it could be, about carbon footprints, or from a health and wellness angle, it could be, quite medical information. But ultimately, all this medical information, it is trying to solve, a issue uh, that a patient has, right? So what we do is, I do this type of content creation called thought leadership content, where I interview the expert. We really discuss this topic that is important to a patient or a client or the audience. And then we create the content in that, we discuss the topic and we create the content in the thought leader's voice, right? And when we write the content, we actually bring it down to making the content really human, and transparent and simple. So you don't use, you extract the jargon and you just get to the point and address the problems that your audience has. And I feel you, in any process, you can simplify it if you take, for one, you take a strategic approach, and then you aim to help. You really aim to address your audience's needs.
That's that's a very detailed approach to storytelling. Thank you for sharing that. There's often a tension between communicating impact and also meeting organizational goal, right? Like let's be honest, every brand has an agenda. How do you personally balance the sense of authenticity with that reality?
Yeah, so to any company, I feel these are both priorities. You can't ignore one or the other, right? So And I think balancing those priorities starts with transparency. It is so critical that authentic communication starts with being honest. Like I mentioned, with that, with creating content, I think honesty needs to permeate through all parts of the business. So we need to acknowledge both the challenges and the progress. Instead of over promising and sugarcoating, I focus on demonstrating real measurable impact where, while being honest about the work still ahead, for example, when working with enterprises, I ensure data backs their social impact stories. But it is also framed in a way that connects with their stakeholders' emotions. So at the end of the day, I focus on aligning organizational goals with a purpose that audiences genuinely care about. So I'm sure that someone has said this before, but I believe that when purpose drives the agenda, authenticity follows naturally.
That's beautiful. And authenticity is really important because, as you mentioned, that's exactly what connects with people. Now you've shared a lot in terms of like why you do what you do and how you do it. Could you give us an example where communication strategy in your work has made a real difference? It could be maybe in women's health or in driving meaningful social impact. Somewhere you could see the shift happening because how it was communicated.
Yeah, so I'd like to tell you more about like focusing on the social impact side of things. I worked on Microsoft's Code Without Barriers project recently. So Code Without Barriers, run by Microsoft, it's a really groundbreaking breaking initiative that started in Singapore, that kind of empowers women in South Asia and Southeast Asia, empowers them, they upskill them, and give them opportunities to actually so that they can either transition in their careers or upskill. So I joined the this initiative, and with the challenge of telling these women's stories, and to me that was impact in action. I We really got to talk to these women, find out how this whole initiative has impacted them, how they plan to pay it forward as well, what they learned from the process. And I think I really saw the power of storytelling through that, and telling authentic, genuine stories never grows old, because everybody's story is different. And telling it in a way that is strategic for the company but impactful for your audience is to me is powerful storytelling.
I love how you've broken that down because it's both practical and human. Before we wrap, Minoli, if you could give us one piece of advice to leaders who want to communicate impact more authentically, what would it be?
Transparency. So I would say authenticity and transparency. Be real, right? So, like, yes, as a like a content communication strategist, I'm also very strategic with my communications. But I think it becomes easier to be strategic when you are transparent. So, and I touched on this earlier as well. So, my piece of advice would be always paint the real picture. You got to always be transparent with what's going on, who you are, what you are, and just don't scratch the surface with your brand. Dive deeper. And that's where you connect with your audience. Even if you're just selling a product, and I work with a lot of companies that also, just they sell products, and their main agenda is actually selling the product. But I always encourage them, dig deeper. Why should somebody buy your product? And that goes deeper than just talking about USPs. It's talking about why you exist. So scratch that surface and also be transparent with who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, and even and answering your audience's questions quite in an authentic way.
Minoli, thank you so much for sharing your journey and the thinking behind your work. You've reminded us that communication is important in terms of the social impact that it can impact the social impact that it can create. I also feel that some of the points that you mentioned today, it's not just applicable to brands but to individuals as well in terms of how is it that they can communicate on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Shreya. Thanks for the opportunity.